Okay, so get comfortable because I may well be standing here for quite a while because I'm going to be talking to you about the other theatres of World War II, or the other theatres, basically other places in the world where fighting is taking place. Now, the exam paper that you study has a very much a British-centred focus, so it tends to focus just on what the events that Britain are involved in. However, your understanding of those events will be enhanced if you look at what's going on across the world at the same time. Even some things that Britain are involved in overseas may not be touched on during your exam, but again, if you understand the wider context of what's going on during World War II, it should give you a better understanding of the things that your exam paper might ask you to answer questions about. So, first of all, I'll start by just reconfirming for you who's fighting who. So on the side of the Allies, Britain, America, Russia, and countries that are part of the British Commonwealth, like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India. They are fighting against the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. So, first of all, we have the Battle of the Atlantic. In 1940, Germany controlled Western Europe, and Britain rely on supplies of troops, food, medicine, and equipment that needs to be shipped over from Canada and the USA. The Germans use submarines or U-boats. They also use airplanes and ships to attack shipping convoys which are bound for Britain. The Royal Navy have to escort these convoys because without these convoys, Britain will essentially starve. They will be crippled by this lack of resources, and that many sea battles ensue throughout World War II. During this time, 50,000 merchant seamen were killed. Now, as a proportion of the various different arms of the British forces, this is the highest proportion of people that are killed. Britain came very close to surrendering, but eventually the Enigma Code was broken and America got involved on the side of the British in 1941, and these two events combined helped the British to turn the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic, and eventually by 1944, or late 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was won. Next up, the bombing campaign. So, the bombing campaign, just in the same way as Germans inflicted the Blitz upon the British and the Americans also did the same thing to the Germans. Essentially, what they would do is they would use a policy of area bombing of German industrial cities. At that time, they didn't believe that the bombs that they were dropping were accurate enough to take out specific targets, so rather they focused on very large targets such as cities. Again, same as the Blitz, they were trying to damage production, weaken morale, and between 1939 and 1945, Allied planes dropped 3 million tons of bombs on 131 German cities. This kills 1 million civilians and it makes 8 million Germans homeless. Operation Barbarossa. You won't be asked about this at all, but in order for you to better understand why it is that Germany seemed to suffer in a lot of the conflicts that you might be asked about, you do need to know about this. Operation Barbarossa is the conflict between Germany and Russia, or rather it's the operation which signals Germany's invasion of Russia in June 1941. It's by far the largest conflict of the war. Millions of men are involved in the fighting, many more millions of civilians are killed during this conflict, and estimates range from anywhere between 12 and 20 million people, and vast quantities of resources are used. Germany are almost successful. They almost capture the Russian capital, Moscow, but then the tide turns. They try to attack a city called Stalingrad, where they are summarily defeated. The long and brutal campaign virtually cripples the German war effort, and once they are defeated at Stalingrad, this basically signals the beginning of the end of the war. There's also campaigns fought in North Africa. So, as I said, Italy is part of the Axis forces fighting with Germany. Libya in northern Africa is an Italian colony. Egypt is a British colony. Italy invade Egypt in September of 1940, and during the fighting that ensues, British and Indian forces managed to capture 130,000 Italian soldiers. Hitler, by way of reinforcing the Italians, sends in a group called the Afrika Korps, who are led by a man called General Erwin Rommel. There are many battles that take place across North Africa. And then finally, at the Second Battle of El Alamein in 1942, the British forces under Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery drive the Axis all the way west back to Tunisia. The Axis troops surrender in May 1943, and ultimately the Allies win the campaign for North Africa. Moving on to Greece. So, Italy invade Greece in October 1940. Germany invade Greece in April 1941. The Greek army is vastly outnumbered, so British send reinforcements to them. Greece surrender in April 1941. British forces retreat and evacuate from a place called Crete yet again, and 30,000 British forces are killed or captured by May 1941. It's another defeat for the British. In Southeast Asia, in December 1941, Japan attacks the US forces at Pearl Harbor. This forces the USA to declare war on Japan, and thereafter Germany also declare war on the USA. So basically this event brings the USA into the war. Thereafter, Japan start to extend the territory that they control in Southeast Asia. By May 1942, Japan controlled large areas, including the formerly British Malaysia, Singapore, Burma, Brunei, and Papua New Guinea. Essentially, the Japanese forced the Dutch and the British out of Southeast Asia. Those forces then fight to reclaim their land, and to begin with, that's an absolute disaster. They're beaten most of the time. They fight the Japanese, but by 1944, a combined Japanese, or rather attacks by Chinese forces, American forces, and British forces overwhelm the Japanese, and the Allies start to be victorious in that part of the world. Italy. So Churchill believed that Italy was the soft underbelly of the Axis, and the Allies, after they'd been victorious in North Africa, they invade Sicily on the 9th of July 1943. On the 25th of July, very shortly thereafter, Mussolini is overthrown. He's replaced by an anti-fascist government, and on the 3rd of September, that new government make peace with the Allies. Rome then falls on the 4th of June. However, despite that, the Allies remain outnumbered by German forces that are based in Italy, and Italy is not completely surrendered until the 29th of April 1945.